Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Zero Hour. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and joining us now, it's a special pleasure, a former host of this program back when it was called Take Action News, who has moved on back to bigger and better things, proving that we live in a just universe. The good friend of WEAC Radio and of this program, David Shuster. David, thanks so much for coming on the show.
RJ, it is a pleasure to be with you. You know, I may be onto a bigger organization, but my heart will always belong to WEAC Radio. Trust me on that.
Well, we love you here, too. And listen, I wanted to have you on the show because I was thrilled to learn that you've got a new program coming out on maybe started already, Al Jazeera Network at 5:30 Eastern, Power Politics. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say it airs Saturday at 5:30. It repeats it Sunday at 12:30 and 3:30. And basically, it's a pretty quick-paced half-hour show that tries to give all of our viewers a flavor of what's going on in some of the key races, some of the key battleground Senate races, and a couple House and gubernatorial races. We run some ads. We try to focus on the issues. We try to bring out some of the latest polling and also identify the political strategy on both sides. And so far, we're off to a pretty good start. I think viewers will find some similarities between what we're doing and some of what we try to do at WEAC Radio and Take Action News. But it's a really interesting sort of tour through the political landscape each week and what's happening in all these campaigns, and specifically what's happening given the record amount of money that's being spent to try to influence the outcomes.
Well, it's exactly what people need to be hearing right now, and you've got a couple correspondents with you, including my good friend Michael Schur, who I was pleased to see is going to be part of your effort. He's dogged about this political stuff, and if he still has the beard, when he grew that beard, I told him he's not only my friend, he is now my rabbi. But You've got a great team, and tell us, so you're going to be covering some of the key races, and, you know, as everybody talks about politics now, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this, it seems like nobody can talk about 2014 for more than 4 or 5 minutes without getting into 2016. What's Hillary going to do? The Clinton family, the Clinton baby, Mitt Romney. Is Mitt going to get back in the race? And it's starting to feel like deja vu all over again. But I think for the next couple months, you guys are really going to be concentrating on what people need to know. Maybe I'm getting this wrong, but I get the sense, knowing you, that you're really going to be concentrating on, hey, look, people, there's stuff going on right now you need to know.
Yeah, we're focused very much on the issues in 2014 and what some of these issues are that will determine the outcome of control of the U.S. Senate, in which if the Republicans take control, they will bury President Obama's agenda the final 2 years in his office. So we talk a little bit about that, what the implications would be. And then we go state by state and go through some of the key races, whether it's education in North Carolina, whether it's the anti-Washington sentiment in Iowa and Kentucky, or whether it's veterans issues. And so what we try to do is provide voters with some, obviously, facts about where these issues stand, and then also try to provide some perspective about the politics, about how the politicians are trying to drive voters to particular concerns or particular viewpoints, so that when voters are getting bombarded with a record number of television and radio ads, they're able to sort of pull it apart and have a better understanding of what the politicians want them to think about, and how sometimes that is not, oftentimes it's not always what the voters really want to think about.
Right, exactly. And let me pick your brain about that for a second, if I can, because there are a couple things that, you know, I want to get your thoughts about. They've been on my mind. One of them is we heard a lot a few weeks ago, at least, and still hearing a little bit about Senator Elizabeth Warren being used to help out in a couple races where you might not expect a Massachusetts liberal to be considered of value. One was the race in Kentucky, and the other was a race in West Virginia, I believe. So, so my interpretation of that is, at least there are some people in these swing states who think that a economic populist message will work for them. And obviously, you know, there are going to be differences. You can't go into West Virginia with an attitude about coal that Warren might have. She might need to downplay that or whatever. So I don't mean to oversimplify, but I guess the question is less about Elizabeth Warren as a personality, although she's a dynamic politician, but more about, do you think this economic populism message sells, and do you think Democrats are pushing it enough or not?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, Elizabeth Warren is raising a ton of money for progressives and for these campaigns. So, for example, with Allison Grimes in Kentucky, the first thing that Elizabeth Warren said is, look, we have a disagreement on coal policy. However, we agree on 95% of everything else. And what it has enabled Allison Grimes to do is be able to bring in a lot of money, generate a lot of enthusiasm among progressive voters, and at the same time try to excite the kinds of people in the Democratic Party that Allison Grimes is going to need if she's going to beat Mitch McConnell. I would suggest that Elizabeth Warren's appearance in Kentucky has probably been worth at least 3 or 4 points that Allison Grimes might not have gotten otherwise, because Elizabeth Warren is able to underscore this is a crucial race and that beating Mitch McConnell could mean the difference for Democrats in terms of holding on to the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. And you know, what's interesting about the Kentucky race, I mean, we're going to, let's talk politics since we both love it and you got a show about it. What's interesting to me about the Kentucky race, and I'm going to break my own rule a little bit here, but interesting to me is that a lot of people said that Allison Grimes Lundgren was a handpicked Bill Clinton candidate at one point, close to the Clinton folks. Now, Elizabeth Warren, of course, I don't know that she'll do it, but she keeps getting put up as a possible challenger in 2016. You get this sort of a intersection of the Clinton kind of third way triangulating politics and Elizabeth Warren kind of working together on behalf of one candidate. But if Warren's really worth 3 or 4 points, which is really interesting observation, it suggests to me that that message really needs reinforcement. Maybe some other candidates could use it as well.
Well, and that's the thing. Elizabeth Warren has been in much bigger demand than Hillary Clinton has. In fact, Elizabeth Warren, I believe, has gone to 12 different Senate races. You mentioned West Virginia. She's been out in Iowa. She's been out in Colorado. She's been up in Minnesota to help Al Franken. So Elizabeth Warren is collecting a ton of political IUs that might benefit her if she were to challenge Hillary Clinton in 2016. But I think it's also a reminder that a lot of Democrats assume that, if you want to talk about 2016 for a sec, that Hillary Clinton is going to have an easy march to the nomination. But a lot of Democrats, I think, are also realizing, well, the person who's really been able to energize Democrats and draw some very clear distinctions with Republicans in this campaign has been Elizabeth Warren, even when she's appearing with more centrist Democrats like Allison Grimes in Kentucky.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting to me. And now let's pivot, if we can, if you don't mind my picking your brain again for a minute. Let's pivot and talk about Alaska. Alaska is an interesting race because, of course, Alaska considered a red state in many ways. We've got it's a home of Sarah Palin, the demi-governor, as I think of her, of that state, and it's the home of a number of conservatives. And we've got Mark Begich, the Democrat, running. And he has injected into the race the notion of expanding Social Security, which he's been vocal about for at least a year, maybe longer. What have you been following? What's going on with the Alaska race? Is that an interesting one? Is that it got national implications, or are they just crazy up there?
I think you're spot on in terms of identifying Alaska. I think it's been one of the most intriguing Senate races this year. Mark Begich has far exceeded a lot of people's expectations in terms of how strong his campaign has been, how disciplined he has been. Dan Sullivan is a primary Republican opponent now. Has made some missteps, including allegations that Mark Begich hasn't really done much for the state of Alaska, and then Begich ran the very next television ad saying, well, where Dan Sullivan was standing was actually an Air Force base that I helped have the federal government construct for Alaska. So Begich has been running a very strong campaign, and I think he has also sent a message to a lot of Democrats that it may be a wise position to try to explain Social Security and argue for expanding it as a way both to attract moderate voters and to energize progressive and more liberal voters who traditionally are more familiar with Social Security.
Now, pivoting for just a second then, and it's fascinating, it really going to be worth watching. We had the president yesterday give an economic speech that, you know, hopefully, if I were a candidate of his party, I would want to be I would want to use that speech as a flag to march under, but it struck me it was a little diffuse, and I'm not sure it's going to get the Democrats the kind of rallying cry that they want. But maybe you had a different take, or my concern is that the Democrats maybe are not being coherent enough. So I guess as we close out, do you have any closing thoughts about what people should be watching for in the next month?
I think if the day comes when Democrats have a coherent and disciplined message across the party, hell is going to freeze over, because that has certainly not been the case in this election and previous elections. And you're absolutely right. President Obama is trying to say, hey, the economy is doing a lot better than a lot of people think. However, a lot of people look up and see, okay, the Dow's fine and corporate profits are way up, but hourly wages are stagnant. The middle class is still looking at the income inequality gap getting bigger and bigger. And there's a feeling out there that Washington simply has not been able to address that. That, yes, the president was able to keep the nation from going into a massive depression and get the economy out of the ditch, but as far as solving the problem of the income gap between wealthy and poor, Washington either hasn't done anything or has actually made it worse. And there's this pervasive feeling, fueled in part by Democrats' incoherence and by Republicans' message making, that Washington simply cannot get things done with President Obama at the helm. And a lot of Democrats, therefore, are very nervous about how that may play back with their races this fall.
Got it. And to learn more about how this all plays out, I'm going to be watching Power Politics with David Shuster every Saturday at 5:30 p.m. on Al Jazeera News. David, thanks so much for joining us.
RJ, it's a pleasure. Regards to you and everybody at We Act Radio. Always a pleasure being on with you, and good luck to you.
And to you. We will be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.